Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Sir,
Yeah.
so but equal sign, sir, like less or equal, is there
Yeah.
any value for of C and N for which it will equal to the like left and right side will be equal? Like less than is fine, but will there be any C and N for which it will equal to this, like both the expressions?
Equal means what? See, Z is varying, so it's not going to be equal for all Z, right?
No, no, but
I'm
at
taking
least
all. I'm making a certain statement. I'm saying certain inequality is true for all sufficiently large mod Z. So what may happen is I may choose. So first of all, if n is at least 1, okay, then this is not. Then if I take very large values of Z, I'm going to get strict inequality. No matter what constant I take, if I take any non-zero constant, non-zero real constant, I'm going to get strict inequality if n is at least 1. Yeah, because I have something cubic and I have something quadratic. So the cubic is always going to be larger than the quadratic for sufficiently large mod Z. And it will be much larger. The ratio will tend to infinity actually. So no matter what real constant I take, this is always going to be a strict inequality for mod Z large. But it doesn't matter. I'm just saying less than or equal to suffices for the whole argument.
Sir,
Yeah.
say if n equal to 0, then that will not hold, right? That less than equal to condition.
No, even n equal to zero also it will hold, no?
How? Because one quadratic may happen that, like, it may happen that one quadratic is always taking value smaller than another quadratic.
Yes, but up to a constant, not one quadratic may take value bigger than a quadratic, but one quadratic will always take values. See, up to a constant. Say something like z square and z cube. Say take z square and z square plus z.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So z square plus z may take larger. So z square plus z can take larger values than z square, but not more than 2z square. You see, once I put in a constant, that this does hold.
Yes,
See, if you take two quadratic polynomials, say the leading coefficient is 1, suppose, then the ratio is going to tend to 1 as z tends to infinity. So if I put a constant bigger than 1, I will always get this kind of inequality.
yes, sir, got it.
Yeah. Yeah. So okay, I hope, okay, there have been many questions on this, so I hope it is now clear. I thought this would be kind of obvious, so I didn't elaborate too much in the slides. But just think about it and you will have no difficulty proving this inequality. Sometimes writing too much on the slides is also not good, because then it clouds the main point. So so we have the poles are at 0, minus alpha and minus beta, and you can compute the residues at minus alpha and minus beta. I have written the answers: beta raised to n upon alpha minus beta, and minus alpha raised to n upon alpha minus beta. And the residue at 0, what do we know? What will be the residue at 0? Once again, if I apply the same old formula, the residue at 0 will be 1 upon n factorial, nth derivative at 0. So this is Fn. So I'm calling this residue at 0 as Fn because it depends on n. And hence Fn is equal to, we know Fn now, because sum of residues is equal to the integral. We know that the integral is 0. So this residue at 0 will be equal to minus the sum of the other residues. So it will be minus of beta raised to n minus alpha raised to n upon alpha minus beta. So that is the same as alpha raised to n minus beta raised to n.
For alpha and beta, the residues are calculated using the integration formula around the pole.
Just the usual limit, right? You have a simple pole. So you just multiply by z. Suppose the pole is at minus alpha. Suppose one of the poles is at minus alpha. So you just take limit of z plus alpha times this function and take limit as z tends to minus alpha.
You have not done Cauchy's estimate here for the integral and then calculated the value.
I'm sorry.
For example, the function has poles at alpha, beta, and minus alpha, minus beta, and 0. So around minus alpha and minus beta, we can use Cauchy's estimate, and around 0, we have to do the formula.
No, I'm not. No question. I'm just explicitly calculating it. No estimate.
Okay.
Just explicitly calculate it. So the integral is 0 in the limit, but if the integral is 0 in the limit, then 0 will be equal to the sum of the residues. So I know, yeah. So you just compute. So sum of residues is 0. You know the residues at minus alpha and minus beta. So you know the residue at 0, and I've written the answer. Fn equal to 1 upon root 5 times 1 plus root 5 by 2 raised to n minus 1 minus root 5 by 2 raised to n. Thus, this is an example where the integral is known due to some other reason and can be used to compute residue at some pole. Yeah, is this clear? Is this example clear? After this point, that after this ML inequality, I don't think there's anything tricky. It's just straightforward a residue calculation. And you know two of the residues, so you know the value of the integral, so you can calculate the third residue. Okay, so another technique in this whole contour integration is partial fractions. So to integrate a rational function of the form pz by qz by Euclid's algorithm, first reduce to the case where Euclid's algorithm, first reduce to the case where degree of pz is less than that of qz. Yeah, you can always do this. So reduce to, you want to integrate one polynomial upon another polynomial, reduce to the case where the degree of the numerator is less than that of the denominator. This you can always do. So for example, if I want z cube upon z square plus 1, then I will write this as this z cube I will write as z square plus 1 times z minus z. Z times z square plus 1 minus z, and then z square plus 1 will cancel, and I will be left with integrating z upon z square plus 1. The z square will cancel, and yeah, you will be left with a sum of two things where the degree of the numerator is less than that of the denominator. So you can always reduce to this case first of all. Then you can use partial fractions according to the following rules. So if the term in the denominator is az plus b raised to the power k, then the term in the partial fractions decomposition will be a1 upon az plus b plus a2 upon b az plus b square plus dot 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 plus ak upon az plus b raised to the power k. If the term in the denominator is az square plus bz plus c raised to the power k, then you will do a1z plus b1 plus a2z plus b2 upon a1z plus b1 upon az square plus bz plus c plus another such term upon az square plus bz plus c square and dot 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 plus akz plus bk upon z square plus bz plus c whole to the k. So this is the general recipe. So this will become clear through examples. I suppose, I think you all have used partial fractions in MA 105 probably, maybe even before that. So let's take an example directly. So let's take I to be integral 3z cube plus 7z minus 4 upon z square plus 2 square integrated on mod z equal to 2. So 3z cube plus 7z minus 4 upon z square plus 2 raised to 2. This is az plus b upon z square plus 2 plus cz plus d upon z square plus 2 whole square. Let's simplify this. So 3z cube plus 7z minus 4 is az plus b into z square plus 2 plus cz plus d upon z square plus 2 whole square. Now I can equate numerator and denominator. So 3z cube plus 7z minus 4 is az plus b into z square plus 2 plus cz plus d. Now just substitute suitable values of z to get hold of the a, b, c, d. So let's just simplify this. 3z cube plus 7z minus 4 is az cube plus bz square plus 2a plus c times z plus 2b plus d. Now this immediately tells you that a is equal to 3 and b is equal to 0. Similarly, if I put z equal to 1, I get 2a plus c equal to 7 and 2b plus d equal to -4. Yeah, equating the constants, I get 2b plus d equal to -4, and substituting z equal to 1, I get 2a plus c equal to 7. I hope that is correct. So just substitute. No, yeah. No, maybe, yeah. 2b plus d is directly -4, and then when I put z equal to 1, I will get 2a plus c minus plus 4. Sorry, -4, that cancels, equal to, yeah, I think it is correct. Yeah, so you get, yeah, is it correct? Everybody agrees? Yeah, can I go ahead?
Yes, sir, you can go
Yes,
ahead.
sir.
Yeah, okay. So I suppose some of you have verified this correct. So now let's break up the integral. So I becomes 3z integral 3z upon z square plus 2 plus integration z minus 4 upon z square plus 2 square. I've forgotten the dz, but anyway. So first integral can be computed. So you know how to compute these integrals. Now we have enough experience with that. So the first integral can be computed easily as 3 by 2 times, you just write this as z plus root 2i plus z minus root 2i upon z square plus 2. So which is 3 by 2 times 1 upon z minus root 2i plus 1 upon z plus root 2i. And this you can see it gives you 6 pi I just by our usual integration 1 upon z minus z naught is equal to 2 pi I. Using that, this gives you both the poles square root 2i and minus square root 2i are contained inside the circle mod z equal to 2. So each of them contributes a 2 pi I. So it becomes 3 by 2 into 4 pi I. So 3 into 2 pi I, so 6 pi I. And to compute the second integral, we use Cauchy residue theorem, which says that the sum of the integral of a function along the closed contour equals 2 pi I times sum of residues at the singularities in the contour. And okay, I've just once again recalled the formula. So therefore, in this example, the residue at square root 2i becomes this d by dz of z minus square root 2i square times this at z equal to root 2i. Residue at minus square root 2i is similar. So add the 2, multiply by 2 pi I, we get the second integral. Add it to the value of the first integral, we get the final answer. So I'll leave the details of the computation to you. So we had sum of two integrals. The first integral came out to be 6 pi I. We were trying to compute the second integral, and we know the two residues. So compute the residue, add them up, multiply by 2 pi I. That gives you the second integral. So now after that, it's just computation, which I will leave. It's mechanical computation. Okay, is this clear?
Sir?
Yeah.
So is there any easier method for finding the residues? Like, do we have to every time use this multiple derivatives?
Yeah, but well, easier. Well, otherwise you have to.
We can expand it, right? If possible.
Yeah, but yeah, but that is correct. But sometimes expanding is not much easier either. It's true that sometimes expanding the LoRa series is easier than computing the derivative. Sometimes not. I mean, depends. See, in this case, it's not too bad because the poles are, yeah, pole is of order 2, so you have to only differentiate. You just have to take the first derivative. In cases where you have to take higher derivatives, if the order of the pole is large, then yes, then it may be easier to get the LoRa series expansion and then calculate the residue. But here, if the order of the pole is 1 or 2, then differentiation is not so bad. And differentiation also, you are really differentiating and substituting a certain value. So even when you take derivative, some terms become 0. So you can only focus. Even the computation, you can do little less than computing the full derivative. You only need to compute that part of the derivative which will remain non-zero when you substitute z equal to z naught. When you compute the derivative, it may be a sum of various terms, but some of those terms will obviously vanish when you put z equal to z naught. You are only interested in the remaining terms, so it's not so bad.
But we do have to calculate derivative multiple times, so we'll have to go step by step, right? From first derivative, then second derivative, and third derivative, and so on.
Yeah. That is true.
Earlier derivative vanishes, even then we have to keep on computing because the next derivative may not vanish at that.
That is true. But I meant when the order is one or order of the pole is 1 or 2, in which case the derivative is just one. You should differentiate at the most once. Yeah. Finally, if it's a very complicated function, then a complicated computation cannot be avoided. I mean, of course, but all the examples we will deal with, the order of the pole will be reasonable, sort of very manageable. But yes, the other option would be to simply break up this thing into partial fractions, z minus 4 upon z square plus 2, use the geometric series to expand around the two poles, get the Laurent series expansion around the poles, and compute the coefficient of 1 by z. That's also possible. Okay, so let's change topics a little bit now. We'll compute some more examples, but of a slightly different kind. Computing real integrals. So perhaps if you remember at the very start, I said that sometimes complex analysis allows you to solve problems which a priori have nothing to do with complex numbers. So this is an illustration of that. So we will see some applications of complex analysis to computing real integrals. So we will sort of artificially involve complex analysis and make our life easy. So let f from closed interval 0 infinity to r be a function such that integral 0 to r fx dx exists for each r greater than 0. Now we are dealing with real valued functions, and suppose the integral from 0 to r exists for all r bigger than or equal to 0. One then defines the improper integral from 0 to infinity fx dx to be limit r tends to infinity integral from 0 to r fx dx. This is going to be our definition of the improper integral from 0 to infinity. Integrate from 0 to r and take a limit as r goes to infinity. So this is a definition. If the limit exists, we will say that the integral exists. If the limit does not exist, the function is not integrable from 0 to infinity. Similarly, if you have this is from 0 to infinity, here the domain was 0 to infinity. Instead of that, if the domain is minus infinity to plus infinity, so if f is from minus infinity to plus infinity to r is a function. So again, there's a little typo here. This minus infinity to infinity should be in open brackets, not close brackets. Infinity is not a number, so I really should have been in open brackets. So I'll make this change. Close brackets doesn't make sense. Take open brackets. Suppose from f from minus infinity to infinity to r is a function so that integration fx dx from minus a to b exists for every a comma b bigger than or equal to 0. For every such pair a comma b, then the improper integral from minus infinity to infinity is defined as limit minus a limit of integration fx dx from minus a to b, limit as a comma b tends to infinity. F is said to be integrable if this limit exists. If f is integral, the integral can be computed as limit r tends to infinity, integral from minus r to plus r fx dx. Yeah. So simply this is our definition. If you have an integrable function, integrate from minus r to plus r and take a limit as r tends to infinity. That is our definition of integral from minus infinity to plus infinity. Are all the definitions clear?
Sir?
Yeah.
So good. So in this, when we are taking minus infinity to infinity, we have defined it as limit a comma b tends to infinity minus a to b. So we have taken a and b separate, right? Like two separate real numbers.
Yeah.
So why are we taking a and b to be separate and then taking the limit?
Because otherwise So otherwise, how would you define it? So you see, the point is, so this is consistent with. See, I want to say that no matter. I want to say that so what would be the natural meaning that you would assign to integral from minus infinity to infinity? It would mean that if I take arbitrarily large interval around 0, an interval can be of any, and such that the endpoints go to infinity, the limit should exist, right?
Yeah, so I'm saying, is there any?
The endpoints can go to infinity in any order. I mean, so it should not just be from minus a to plus a. So I want the lower end and the upper end to tend to infinity in any direction, at any speed, sort of.
Okay, so they should like approach infinity independently, right?
Yeah, I want them to approach infinity independently, and for any such sort of along any no matter what sequence of points they go to infinity by, the integral should be the same. I mean, the limit should exist. Yeah.
Sir, is the converse true? I mean, we are saying that if we take that single limit r tends to infinity minus r to r fx dx, so if that exists, then can we say that f is integrable or
no. I'm coming to that. We cannot. That is why this fuss about a and b. Yeah. For instance, yeah, so immediately it answers your question. So for instance, the function 1 upon 1 plus x squared dx is integrable on R. Yeah, so this is like tan inverse of x when you integrate it, and integral from a to b gives you tan inverse b minus tan inverse a, and as a and b tend to infinity in any way, so you will get whatever. Like, pi by 2 minus pi by 2, so it will be pi. So no matter what, how a and b go to infinity, this integral exists. Yeah, it's tan inverse b minus tan inverse a, and if you let a and b tend to infinity, I mean, if you tend, it will be tan inverse b minus tan inverse a, and if you let b tend to infinity and a tend to minus infinity, so you will get pi by 2 minus pi by 2, so it's equal to pi. So this function is integrable. On the other hand, and to answer your question, this integral from integration sin x dx from minus infinity to infinity, this does not exist. Yeah, because this integral is minus cos x, and if you substitute if you go from a to b, this is minus cos b. Yeah, so this is minus cos b minus plus cos a, and clearly as b and a tend to infinity and as b tends to infinity and a tends to minus infinity, this limit is not going to exist. Minus cos b plus cos a. So this does not exist. On the other hand, if you had only just look to answer your question, suppose you had only taken the definition of suppose on the other hand, if you take this if you take integration fx dx from minus r to plus r, then this limit will exist because you will get minus cos x. Yeah, and when you substitute r, you will get minus cos r plus cos minus r, and cos is even, so you will just get 0.
What does it mean to decay 0 sufficiently outside a small cell?
I'll come to that. I have not reached that yet. I'm just explaining first why this. So this first of all answers the question that if this is this example is an example where this limit integral fx dx from minus r to plus r does exist, but the function is not integrable, because if I take integral sin x dx from minus r to plus r, this is 0. So limit does exist, but this integral actually does not exist, because if I integrate from if I integrate from a to b and let a tend to minus infinity and b tend to plus infinity in some fashion, the limit may not exist. So now intuitively, for improper integral to exist, the function has to decay to 0 sufficiently rapidly outside a small set. So the point is, in general, for the integral to exist, it's not necessary that the function has to tend to 0, but it should. But roughly speaking, I mean, this is a slightly vague statement, but roughly speaking, the function has to tend to 0 outside a small set. So so here is an example that I've drawn. So you can have this function which is decreasing, but at the integer points, it has a certain spike. So at 1, it has a spike. At 2, it has a narrower spike. At 3, it has even narrower spike, and so on. And what may happen is the sum of areas under those spikes, that extra area under the spike, that may tend to some limit. So this is an example where the function is not tending to 0, but the integral exists. Integral from 0 to infinity in this case. So for example, the extra area under the first spike may be 1, second one it may be half, third one it may be quarter, and so on. So that those extra things that you're adding are actually tending to some finite limit. So even if the function doesn't tend to 0, the integral does exist. But what is happening is that it is tending to 0 outside some small set. One can make precise statements, but never mind. And this may look like a discontinuous example. I mean, this may look like a non-differentiable example, but you can also construct infinitely differentiable functions for which this happens. You can smoothen it out. Yeah, is this clear?
Sir?
Yeah.
So we need to have some conditions, right? Like for instance, if the spikes are having heights 1, like areas 1, half, 1/3, 1/4, and so on, the series actually diverges then.
Yeah,
So,
I know.
So what exactly will be necessary for that, like for any function to have an integral from -infinity to +infinity?
See, the point is to if you want to make the most sort of the most general condition to make so that it becomes necessary and sufficient, that will be a bit complicated to make this sort of to put let's say to put the most general conditions possible. It's not so easy. Therefore, I'm not attempting that. So in all our functions, we are not going to deal with functions of this kind. See. One can make more precise statements along this line, but it involves something called measure theory, which is outside our domain, so to say. Yeah, so you will be able to state some theorems. Okay, you'll be able to make it precise, but if you want to make a statement, if you want to give the difficulty is to give conditions which are necessary and sufficient both. That is difficult. You understand my point? You can put certain conditions so that this will hold. That's not so difficult. But to put conditions which are both necessary and sufficient is a task. So I will keep that a little vague. Often, so how does complex analysis come in? So this was all real analysis. So now often instead of a real variable, the function fz with the complex variable. So you just replace the x by a z and think of it as a complex variable, and this becomes this is holomorphic outside some discrete set. This now allows us to exploit the Cauchy residue formula to compute the real integral. So how do you do that? So the above integral means if you want to integrate from -r to +r, this above integral can be thought of as an integral over a part of a contour, gamma r being a line segment along the real axis between -r and +r, together with a semicircle CR of radius r around 0. So whatever I have drawn below. So this gamma r is this contour which goes in the anticlockwise direction, first from -r to +r and then along the semicircle CR. So this integral from -r to +r is actually a part of this whole contour integral.